Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Brad Johnson with me. Brad is an ex-NFL player, Super Bowl champion, and now a trick shot specialist. And I'm super excited to highlight his story and everything that's led him to where he's at today. So, Brad, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out to me, Phil, and we'll have a great time telling some stories and hopefully reach out to a few people out there listening to us.
You betcha. So to start with your story, as you were growing and getting better at sports, you ended up being really good at both football and basketball. So talk a little bit about how you got started playing sports and what was the fire behind you as a kid wanting to really, grow and develop.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town, Black Mountain, North Carolina, up in the Western Carolina part. And my dad, he ran camps called Camp Ridgecrest and Camp Crestridge for boys and girls. It was spend the night camps and cabins and basketball and lakes and riding horses and archery and horseback and soccer and you name the sport, we did it. And my mom, she was a PE teacher and later became a high school principal. And she was an all-state basketball player in high school. And my dad, he coached high school football and basketball at one time. So at all these camps, I grew up with a ball in my hand. I was always competing against someone. And someone was usually a little bit bigger than me as a little kid, and someone was a little bit, but someone always took me under the wing too. So I love sports, and but I played basketball as my favorite sport as a kid. I played football, baseball, basketball, and then all those other things at camps. But basketball was my love, and I played it from my second grade year all the way through my freshman year of college. Never missed a day of playing basketball, whether it's shooting foul shots or playing games or whatever it may be, I was competing at it. And that was what I wanted to become. I want to be like Larry Bird. I want to be like Chris Mullen. I want to be, I watched basketball on TV growing up watching Michael Jordan and Dean Smith basketball in North Carolina. So that was my passion. And I just love sports. And growing up at some point, I knew I was going to have to make a decision, but I couldn't really make that decision till later on.
Absolutely. So as you're progressing in high school, you're All-American in football and probably in All-State in basketball. And so talk a little bit about, that decision of where to go to college, because when you're that good at two sports, you've got a couple offers, but you were leaning towards the basketball with the love of that.
Right. At my high school, it's called Owen High School. And there was a guy in front of me, his basketball player named Brad Doherty. He's a 7-foot basketball player, All-American in high school, All-American in North Carolina, was an NBA All-Star. And he kind of paved the way of what our basketball program was at our high school, Owen High School. And if you want to have your jersey hung on the wall, you had to be an All-American. And every day. And our high school coach, his name was Bill Burrows, but the coach before him was a guy named Roy Williams, who just retired. And he used to be the high school coach there. And then he went to North Carolina. But my dream, my passion was to play for two coaches. It was basketball. It was a guy named Dean Smith at North Carolina, and it was Bobby Crimmins at Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And that's all I could think about. I mean, I was a really good football player. I made parade All-American in football. And in basketball, I scored 2,400 points in high school and was an all-state player. But I thought I wanted to be a basketball player. And so I was fortunate because Brad Doherty was there. I met all the coaches that came through recruiting him. Yeah. I got to meet them as a youngster. And Brad was 5 years older than me. And so every day, my goal was to be as good as Brad Doherty was in the program.
Yeah.
But all these coaches would come by and they're like, Brad, they said, you're a good shooter, but we don't know what level you really are. Basketball, Brad, you got all this potential, but you're not my skills. I was a late bloomer in football because I really spent all my time playing basketball.
Yeah.
and so eventually I had to make that decision. And I was a 6'5" guy that really couldn't, I wasn't a jumper. I wasn't a fast guy.
Yeah.
I was a, potential college player, pro. They said I was a guy very similar to a guy named Vinny Testaverde. And at that time, Vinny was a guy at University of Miami. He had won a Heisman.
Yeah.
6'5", 225 Greek god, one of those kind of guys, and then he had a 20-some-odd year career in the pros and stuff. And so when I made my decision to go to college, I took a few visits. I went to North Carolina, I went to Georgia Tech, I went to Florida State, and I was going to visit Alabama. And so basically, it became Georgia Tech for basketball or these other schools for football. And
Got
so I
it.
went to Georgia Tech, and a guy named there was Bobby Crimmins. I went to all his camps as a kid, and so I go into his office during the recruiting process, and he says, "Brad, I'd love to have you come here. You got a scholarship, but you can only play 5 guys. And the guy that I'm bringing in your position, the forward position, is a guy named Dennis Scott.
Yeah.
And Dennis Scott was an All-American. He played
Yeah.
11 years in the NBA for Orlando Magic. He's still on TNT TV. And he says, Brad, you're gonna sit the bench behind him. He's my guy. So it kind of helped me in the recruiting process to know that, I'd be playing behind Dennis Scott. But Bobby Crimmins was also, he said, Brad, what do you think you're best at? I said, well, right now I'm best at basketball, but I have a chance to be better at football just because I haven't worked at it. Yeah. He says, Brad, you need to do what's best for you. And so he kind of helped me in that process. I said, my goal is to play in the pros. It probably is football. I just need to spend more time at it.
Yeah.
And so Dennis Scott, he changed my life. He didn't even know it. Probably didn't even know who I am. And but that meeting in that office was key. So I went to Florida State, played for a legend in Bobby Bowden. And we can get into the story, but I ended up playing 2 years of basketball at Florida State, and then played. I was there on a football scholarship though.
Yeah. So I'd like to highlight just that, dialogue between you and the coach. And, once again, in this aspect, we're talking about it from a sports standpoint, but just how important, being honest and upfront with people is, right? It's really easy to take the easy path or sugarcoat the story, right? He could have said, hey, Brad, you'll get to compete. And you would have been able to compete, but he had already made his mind up that, hey, Dennis is going to be the guy. So talk a little bit about just, open conversation, just being honest with people opposed to, sugarcoating it, even if it might make the conversation seem easier at the time.
This was happening back in the 80s. So I don't know if that would happen now in this day and age. I mean, now it's all about NIL deal, all about get you here. How can I load my team? And I'd say that, I just think Bobby Crimmins was a unique coach, a unique kind of guy that people that know him, he had the gray hair from New York, had a funny accent and all those things. But I remember at that Georgia Tech visit, I went in there and I was supposedly the superstar in high school that, All-American in football and basketball and all that kind of thing. But also when I went to Georgia Tech, I went into the football office and I met with the coach then. His name was Bobby Ross, who later we played against each other in the playoffs. When I played for the Washington Redskins, he was Detroit Lions, and I beat him. But in that visit, he says, well, you want to come here and play 2 sports, Brad? Because I'd had that thought of playing both sports in college, which not many people have been doing. And he brings out the thick playbook, and he starts going through the playbook. He goes, these are the protections. He goes, Ricky, Lucy, Roger, Larry, Flash and Lightning, scram and scat right, scat. How are you going to learn all these protections, all these plays, Brad? You know what I mean? I said, well, I'll just make it happen. I don't know. You know what I mean? But I wasn't going there. I was not going to Georgia Tech to play football. I was only going there to Georgia Tech to play basketball. Yeah. So he kind of like, I said, I'm going to get you one day. You know what I mean? We're going to play. I don't know where we're going to meet one day. We met in the playoffs, and I don't know if he even remembers that conversation, but I was there at Georgia Tech to play basketball. Yep. But that decision that night, it just helped me make. Bobby Crimmins was honest with me. When I see him today, I always talk about it in these podcasts and stories that I'm thankful for someone that was honest with me. That was about my best situation instead of their best situation. Because when you do recruit a kid, you're getting a kid for 4 years. You want to be impactful in his life. Yep. And so hopefully, when coaches, they sign guys, it's not just because of their talents, because this is the kid, the character, the kid that I want to coach, whether it's he has a great career, a bad career, we're going to be stuck together. And so you want those relationships to mesh also.
Absolutely. So as you alluded to it, you end up deciding, hey, Florida State is the spot for me. And to start with, you start with basketball. So talk a little bit about, starting and playing college basketball and then the transition into football for you.
Yeah. So I went to Florida State, and Bobby Bowden's the head coach there. And he just passed away, but the legend of all legends to ever play for. And at that time, I think he had 165 games total to his win column. And they end up with 377, something like that. So,
Yeah, right.
but I went there on a football scholarship. You only get to have one scholarship. So I went there. And so we do warm up stretches. And so that when you warm up and you stretch, the first string guy, he starts at the 50-yard line, the second at the 45, the third at the 40, the fourth at the 35. It kind of goes down. I was down there at the 5-yard line. I was like, I was the seventh string quarterback,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so we had some great quarterbacks there, but I was going to be what was called redshirted. So I kind of had a free year just to go to school to learn the system. So we get to about October. I'm like, golly, I'm not really doing much on the football team. I'm running scout team. I'm sharing reps there, but and so I talked to, I went to Coach Bowden. I said, listen, not much is going on for me right now. So would you mind if I went out for the basketball team? He says, yeah, we promised that you could play both sports here, Brad. And so you've been redshirted. This would be a good time for you to do it. So I went over to Pat Kennedy. He was the basketball coach at Florida State. And I got in the scrimmage. They're like, who's this guy? We didn't even recruit you. You know what I mean? Because they didn't. I was more of football at Florida State, not the football basketball like it was at Georgia Tech. So I ended up starting 13 games my freshman year at Florida State. Yeah. And so I kind of left the football program. We went to the NCAA tournament. We got beat by Iowa that year by B.J. Armstrong, Roy Marble, and Jeff Moe. I mean, it was played at UCLA Pavilion. And the year was really cool for me because my basketball was my passion. But then next thing you know, I'm playing against Purvis Ellison at Louisville. They just won the national championship. And Elliott Perry at Memphis and Bimbo Coles at Virginia Tech, who played in the Olympics. And, I'm right there with them. And but when I went to the NCAA tournament, I missed half of spring football. At that time, there were 20 days of spring football. So I missed half. Yeah. And so then the next year comes around football season. Well, then I don't get to leave like I did this past year, my second year in October. I got to go through like December. Well, now I kind of get late into basketball, and I'm kind of out of shape. And then we go to the NCAA tournament again. And then I missed another 10 days of spring football. And then, so Coach Bowden and I, we talked. He said, Brad, what are you doing? You're a great player. Whatever you want to do, it's your choice to come here, but you're kind of falling behind by missing spring football. You're kind of falling behind in basketball. So I had to have a hard decision. I said, why did I come to Florida State? I want to be like that guy they talked about, Vinny Testaverde. I want to be a really good player in college. And so I had to make a decision. So I ended up playing one sport. Long story, but that's kind of how it went down.
No, absolutely. So talk a little bit about that. I think, once again, we're talking about it in a sports aspect, but this is a life thing, right? Sometimes people will try and do too many things, and they'll do a lot of things kind of okay instead of any one or two things really well. So maybe talk about that and just decision-making processes of, how to focus in on what's most important instead of saying yes to anything that seems important.
Yeah, I felt, just for that story right there, I felt the difference was for me at Florida State was I was competing against other All-Americans. At that time, my heavy competition was a guy named Casey Weldon at Florida State, who ended up being the runner-up for the Heisman. Yeah. And in basketball, I was competing against Michael Polite and Aubrey Boyd and David White, George McLeod. And so I wasn't the guy. So when Charlie Ward did it a couple years later, right. He really was the starter in football. He really was the starting point guard. So you're competing against yourself, but you're also competing against other players for playing time. Yeah. So I had to make a decision that, could I have done it? Yes. But I had to do what's best for me, because maybe I wasn't the athlete that could just go year round at that time. I just needed to hone in on my skills at one sport, and that was football. So, those conversations that I had with Bobby Crimmins about coming to, what sport to choose, that conversation I had with Bobby Bowden, he was honest with me too. He said, Brad, you can do both, but what's best for you? Yep. And so they were real with me, and there was no pressure, but you got to be thankful for guys that had a little wisdom to themselves at the same time to help out a young kid.
Absolutely. Nope. That's great. So as junior year rolls around, you start getting games, and then about midway through the year, things change. So talk a little bit about that junior year, being a young guy, the emotions of it, and give us a rundown.
Yeah. So when I went to Florida State, there was the other quarterback that was drafted in my class. I'm not recruited in my class. Was Casey Weldon, who we're still best friends to this day. Yeah. And Casey was when we both went to Florida State, they said he's a skinny kid from a little 1A local school called North Florida Christian, that we just kind of brought him in because he's a local kid. And they told him I was a skinny 6'5" white guy that I probably just played basketball. I wanted to finish my career. So we were both pretty good. And we both had NFL. Casey played 8 years in the NFL. So that first year we were redshirted, best friends. We get to the third year, the junior year you're talking about. I win the starting position. I start the first, I think, 6 games of the season. And Casey was a really good athlete, really good player. It kind of says a little bit like Joe Montana at that time.
Yeah.
There were comparisons of that. So they just felt like he was a really good playmaker. They made the change to bench me. And it wasn't because I played bad. It was just because they felt like he was coming on. And so I was a late bloomer a little bit still because of basketball. But at that same time, I didn't think I should have been benched, but I was.
Yeah.
And so it happened. And so you're talking about 2 guys, Casey and I, who were best friends, who were competing for the job at Florida State, but also competing for a position to like maybe win a Heisman, maybe win a national championship, maybe to be drafted in the pros.
Right.
And so it was tough. I took away 6 games of his junior year. He took away a year and a half of my senior year.
Yeah.
And so somehow we still kept that friendship, relationship up. And I'll tell you, sometimes the more you pull against somebody, the better that they do. You know what I mean? So every time I was hoping for Casey to throw an interception, he'd throw a touchdown, the crowd would go wow, And so at some point we just said, listen, let's just pull for each other, be best buds and make it happen. So he ended up being the runner-up to the Heisman his senior year. I ended up being a backup. I only started 1 game my senior year. And then that's kind of how it went down. I thought my career was going to be over, but somehow we can get into that. But that's kind of the way my career was. I didn't have a great college career. I really didn't. Not basketball, not football. I was just a little bit of a late bloomer.
Yeah. So one thing I want to highlight there is just the amount of ego you took out of that situation, right? The amount of yourself you took out, because I think, and once again, you can say it's a different of times or, things of that nature, but today, gosh, you see a kid and he's not getting starting right away, or he's not getting the, reps he wants, and it's a transfer. You said, hey, you know what? This is my friend. Yeah, in a perfect world, I would be the one starting. Absolutely. But that's not the case. And you stuck it out knowing, to your point, hey, this could be a potential, end to a football career for me. So just talk a little bit about being able to take the ego out and truly, supporting someone and being a part of a team and still developing yourself.
It's hard. You're watching somebody else live out your dream. Your best buddy, the guy you're friends with, you play tennis with and go to the beach with, and he's got the best looking girl. He's got people cheering for him. He's got all the interviews. He's the All-American. You know what I mean? So he's living your dream, but it was tough. And so then you got to say, there's 2 things that come up to me. At that time, there wasn't really the transfer portal. So I thought about quitting. I thought about just let me finish up my school. I thought about maybe going to Canadian League. I thought about maybe going to supplemental draft. I thought about let me just quit football and go back and play 1 more year basketball. And then I'll go back to North Carolina, be a school teacher and call it, a good try,
Yeah.
But my dad, I always tell people, he said, it's better to be prepared and not have an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. So when I talk about those moments, maybe I wasn't really ready to be the starter, to be the All-American, to be the guy trying to win it all. Maybe I wasn't, I was still that guy developing as a person, developing as a player. And so the other thing that comes up is you talk about tough people last longer than tough times. Well, it's, in life, you're going to go through adversity. You're going to go, you don't know when those moments are going to become. You don't know if it's an injury, losing your starting position. Your goals are going to get derailed. You're going to have to take some detours, but there's also a saying, it's good to have an end to journey towards, but in the end, it's the journey that matters in the end. So what was my goal? What was my passion? And so I had to find myself where I love football, but I got to become a better player. And so at that time, I met this guy named Alex Serranos. Okay. So Alex was a guy from Chile. He actually was a dorm manager for us. He was getting his degree, his doctorate in sports psychology. He actually works for the Houston Astros now. And the only people there, so the only people that know him at that time was just the dorm manager, make sure everybody gets in bed and not having, fights out there in the parking lot, pool parties and all that kind of stuff. But I used to jump rope all the time. And I was out jumping rope out by the pool. We lived in a place called Burt Reynolds Hall, and there was a U-shaped place. The dorm was. I had a pool in the middle, and I was jumping rope one afternoon, and Alex walked by and he says, "Brad, what are you doing?" He said, "What do you think I'm doing?" He says, "Well, I guess it looks like you're jumping rope." I said, "Yeah, I am. I used to jump 36 minutes of rope a day for 5 days a week, and I was in great shape and all that kind of stuff." And he says, "Brad, I think you're trained to be a triathlete, not a quarterback." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you jumping rope, you run 5 miles a day, you're swimming, and but I don't think you're trained to be a quarterback." And he said, "Why don't you come train with me?" I said, "Well, okay, let's try it." I mean, I'm backing up. So
Yeah.
basically, at that time, we started doing a lot of. He's kind of before his time.
Yeah.
We started doing a lot of medicine ball work. And we started doing a lot of work in the sand called sand plyometrics. Then we started reading books, and then we had long conversations about how to lead your team, and how to be a better quarterback, how to relate to people, and those kind of things. So
Wow.
during that time of being benched and being a backup, I was really working with this guy named Alex Solanos, who's just a dorm manager from Chile, speaks Spanish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm a kid. I'm a kid from North Carolina. Like, what's going on here? But my time at Florida State just wasn't ready. And but I was thankful for the people at Florida State. I was thankful for my head coach, Bobby Bowden, and my QB coach, Mark Richt. And there were great relationships there. But my time wasn't then. It was going to be later. I was just a late bloomer,
Yep, absolutely. So to your point, the senior year goes as it goes, and it's like, well, I didn't get a lot of reps this year, so I don't know if there's going to be an opportunity. And then ninth round of the NFL, you get the call. So talk a little bit about that call and getting into the NFL.
Yeah, I went to that. There was the NFL Combine, so I did get invited to the Combine. There's 17 quarterbacks that get invited, and then there's 3 extra quarterbacks that go. You do the Combine, but then you're throwing extra to the linebackers, to the DBs, to the tight ends, to the running backs, and so I'd become one of the 20 quarterbacks. The other 2 guys were TJ Rubley and Bucky Richardson. And so a lot of guys have made it that way, but at the time you don't know,
Yeah.
So go there, go through the process. When I left the Combine, I thought, listen, I'm as good as any one of these guys. I may be better than all these guys. I really thought I was, but all the other 32 general managers and coaches, they did not think so. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So, so I was just kind of being funny there. But I worked out for the New York Giants, Cincinnati Bengals. They did personal workouts for me. But, I thought I was going to get drafted by the New York Giants. And the coach then was Jim Fossil. And he said, we're going to draft a young guy about the 4th or 5th round, Brad. We have 2 older guys, Phil Simms and Jeff Hostetler, and we want to develop a guy. So I thought that was my pick. And so the 4th or 5th round comes around at the draft. They draft a guy named Kent Graham out of Ohio State. I'm like, oh my God, it's over. You know what I mean?
Right.
That was my team that really had shown me any kind of attention. And so about the 7th round, I get a call from Atlanta Falcons. And I'm sitting in the dorm at Burt Reynolds Hall, just me and my dad. And his guy's name was Campo. And he's the equipment manager at Atlanta Falcons. He's like, Brad, if you don't get drafted, we'd like to bring you as a free agent. And I told him at that time, I said, Campo, listen, I didn't know how the NFL process worked. I said, I'm out. I'm not coming there as a free agent. If I don't get drafted, I'll never make it. I'll go back to North Carolina, be a PE teacher, and call it a day. And so he said, just hang in there, Brad. You never know. And so the 9th round comes around. Now there's only 7 rounds. There was 12 rounds at that time.
Yeah.
The 9th round comes around. I'm laying on my couch. My dad's laying on the floor watching the ticker come across. There's 3 days of the draft. I mean, like no one's even watching the TV except us. And my dad gets excited, and he said, I said, what happened? He said, I think you got drafted. So we had to wait across for the ticker to come across again. It said Brad Johnson, 227th pick. And I'm rolling the screen again. And so that was me. So we were excited. And then about 5 minutes later, I get a call from Denny Green, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, says, Brad, you've been drafted. We're excited to have you. We'll see you next week at the mini camp,
Yeah.
And so, I wasn't the first round pick, and I thought I was ready to quit.
Yeah.
And then Kent Graham, he got drafted by the Giants. He had a long career too. There were 14 quarterbacks. I was the 14th quarterback drafted. I think we had 18 or 19 guys drafted in that class. It was a really good class.
Yeah.
And, but, I was a 9th-round pick, and that's probably where I deserved to be at that time. The guy that drafted me was a guy named Jack Burns. Jack Burns, he recruited me at the University of Louisville. He knew my story. He knew my background of playing football, basketball, being a late bloomer. At the Minnesota Vikings, they had a couple older guys too. They had Wade Wilson and Rich Gannon and Sean Salisbury, and they're like, we're going to draft a young guy, and kind of the same process that the Giants were going to do with me also.
Absolutely. So as you get started, I'd love to say, the story goes, hey, you come in and day one, you're the starting quarterback, you beat everyone out, but you get sent to play overseas for a little bit, and then you come back. And in that year where you come back, you have an injury. So talk a little bit about getting an opportunity to start playing and then have an injury, and the emotions of all of that.
Yeah, I was drafted in 1992. My first couple of years, I didn't get any snaps in practice. We had the second string guy would get the scout team reps. The only days I were throwing on the days off, throwing it to a net on Tuesdays. And, I was warm-ups. That was it,
Yeah.
And so the starting quarterbacks at that time were Rich Gannon and Jim McMahon, and then Warren Moon came in. And then in 1995, the World League came back, and in existence, it went away in 1989 or 1990, something like that. So it came back. I heard about the league. I asked to play. There were 6 teams: Barcelona, Scotland, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Dusseldorf, and I was in London. And so I got a chance to go play in this league. It was in February. So I played 10 games. It was a chance for me to go be a leader, go make plays, go make mistakes, because I didn't play much in college. I've been in pros. I've been there for the pros for 3 years. I'm like, I got no reps. I left my high school 8 years ago, and I've only started 6 games. I got to play. So I went over there and played. And at that time, it was a tough league. It really was. I mean, you're not, it's not plush hotels. It's not great food. It's, it's playing ball. And so when I came back to Minnesota, I had some experience, and then I just kind of waited my time. I was behind Warren Moon, and eventually he got hurt. And then I got my opportunity to play. It's kind of what happened.
Absolutely. So talk about that, just maintaining the confidence through all of that, right? Because I'm sure there were moments kind of like you had at Florida State where it's like, gosh, maybe this just isn't it. Maybe it's kind of run its course. Maybe I should head back. But talk about maintaining your confidence, saying, no, I am good enough to play.
Yeah, it's about, it's about being good enough. It's about opportunity. It's about being ready when your moment comes. Like we talked about the opportunity, being prepared for that moment. So in 1996, we go through training camp, and Warren Moon was a starter. I felt like I had a great training camp. But we get into the last preseason game, and we're playing the New Orleans Saints, and it was the craziest game ever. Meaningless preseason 4th game. People aren't even watching. In that game, I go into halftime, and I was 20 for 25 for 230 yards, and I threw 4 interceptions. And so we lose the game 13-10. And I'm on that bus ride. My dad, he actually surprised me. He came to the game in New Orleans. I didn't know he was going to be there. I seen him by the bus after the game. I didn't know he was there. And I wake up the next day. I'm like, I'm going to get cut. My career's over. Like, people are like, 4 interceptions in a preseason game. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to get cut. And so they kept me. And so the very next week, Warren Moon, he was a Hall of Famer. He gets hurt in the first quarter. And so all of a sudden they got to put in the backup, which is me.
Yeah.
The guy that threw 4 interceptions, the guy they should have cut last week. And then the game takes place, and we're playing the Detroit Lions. The first ball that snapped to me, I dropped back and I fumbled the ball, and it popped up right in my hands. And when I ran, I scrambled for a 15-yard run, get a first down. We kind of get going.
Yeah.
And so my whole career is in front of me. I just threw 4 interceptions last week. I go into the game. The fans aren't even cheering for the backup. They're like, we got to play this guy. I fumbled the first snap, but it came right back in my hands.
Yeah.
And I scrambled for a first down. I kind of got the blood going.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, the game takes place. I have a fourth quarter come from behind win. We win. The first touchdown pass I ever threw was change right, base right, 086 F flat, through a touchdown pass to Chris Carter on a post. We win the game. My daddy's in the stands. I get the game ball.
Yeah.
I give the game ball to my dad, who surprised me last week. And, I give it this pretty cool moment for us to have. We have a fourth quarter win. The next week I start. I'm the NFC Player of the Week.
Wow.
And then here we go. And so the greatness of that story was that year in red zone efficiency, where I ended up leading the NFC. I ended up leading the NFL in red zone efficiency. Those are the moments of those bad mistakes I made in that preseason game.
Yeah.
Danny Green held on to me. He's like, Brad, we can see through just a bad half. We've known you for 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
And we know who you are, who you're going to become. And then, just you had family support also. My dad was there in the bad moment, but then also he's there in the great moment of my first touchdown pass. So I give him the ball, my first time being NFL Player of the Week, all those kind of things. So it's pretty cool moments. That was a pivotal moment where I'm cut, I'm going home, or I get another opportunity, and then I run off with it.
That's so good. So as you continue to, think about that, having that really bad game and then literally the next game, getting the opportunity, did some of that mental work you had done with your friend back in Florida State really come in there? Hey, instead of focusing on the 4 interceptions, all right, Brad, new game, new opportunity, and then, just playing with instinct instead of, the focus of the past.
Yep. It's called meta motivation. It's called concentrate on the process, not the outcome. And what can you control? Like the only things you can control, you always hear about is the 2 things you can control is your attitude and your effort. That's it. You can't, if I throw it, is he going to catch it? Yeah. Have a touchdown, is it going to be an interception? You can't think about the negatives. It's got to be, it's like, why do you play the game? It's like, what, it's putting the ball in my hands. It's putting the ball in my hands. It's the feeling of throwing the ball. It's the feeling of making the play. And Alex, my friend from Chile, we're talking about, he always asked me, he said, why do you play the game? And at first I was like, I want to be the starter. Well, said, what if you're not starting? Okay. I want to be a Pro Bowl player. Okay. Well, what if you're not? Okay. I want to win a Super Bowl. He says, well, what if you don't? You know what I mean? So those aren't the reasons why you play the game. And so it took me forever to figure it out. And so the reasons why you play the game for me, when later is, I love to call the play in the huddle. I love to call U shift to green left west, F short spire 2 wide banana Z over, heads up for 359 smoke. Axe double spirit ladies 735 H pump. I love calling the play. I love being in the middle of that huddle. I love getting up there and figuring out who the mic call it. I love taking the ball and dropping back and giving a play fake and looking the linebacker off and throwing a seam route. And I love getting a first down. I love getting a high five. I love to score a touchdown and celebrate. But those are all what I call 2-second moments.
Right.
2-second moments to call the play, to look the guy off, to make the throw. It's the feeling more than anything else. And so I think when you concentrate on the feeling of why you play, what makes, it's a baseball pitcher. It's is it a curveball? Is it a fastball? It's that moment of making that decision. If you're going to hit, it's that golfer in the moment of making that great flop shot and laying it. It's that feeling, that moment of celebrating. Those are the feelings. And I think if you get caught up in too much of the wins and losses, and those are real. They are. Those decisions are made upon your head, whether they're going to cut you or fire you or whatever you want to say. But when you concentrate on just how great can you become, why do you play the game? Those are the moments that will sustain you over your career.
That's perfect. I love that. So as your time with Minnesota has continued on, that last year with them, you battle through a couple injuries. You get injured, you come back, you get injured. And inevitably at the end of that year, there's a trade that happens to the Redskins, which you mentioned. And going into that year, I'm sure it's a tough move regardless, right? You've kind of had roots there. This has become a home to you. And now you're in a new spot. But I'm sure there's also a little bit of you that has kind of a chip on the shoulder, like, well, you know what, you traded me. Now I'm going to prove that might not have been a good decision. And that year, you have a phenomenal year. So talk a little bit about that transition and that first year in Washington.
Yeah, I've been in Minnesota for 7 years. It's awesome. Made great relationships with coaches, players, people in the community. Loved it. Loved being in Minnesota. Randall Cunningham came in that year in '98. And honestly, I went through a neck injury. I lost all the strength in my hand. I broke my foot, broke my thumb. Like I wasn't even healthy to play. There was no controversy. I was like, I only played 3 games because those were the only 3 games I was healthy.
Right.
So I get traded to the Washington Redskins. And at that time, I'm like, you know what? I just left the team. Minnesota was 15-1. I was the backup again, but things that wasn't even healthy.
Yeah.
So a chip on your shoulder, yeah, I had all that. So I went to Washington, threw for 4,000 yards, which at that time was a big deal. The rules were different,
Right.
and it was a big deal. We win the NFC East, so we win the conference title, go to the playoffs where it hadn't been the playoffs in like 8 years or something like that. And so
Yeah.
it was a fun moment for me. Was it tough? Yes. I was leaving a place that I was comfort zone. I knew the system in Minnesota for 7 years.
Yeah.
I just got married. We had to sell my home. I was building a home in Florida, was buying a home in Washington, was having to learn a new playbook, having to learn like how to get directions to the facility. Like, where am I at?
Yeah.
Those were tough things that were going on. But at the end of the day, I love playing the game. I was thankful for another opportunity. And I love being, at that time, loved playing for the Redskins.
Yes, absolutely. So as your time in Washington's happening, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to be said about having that experience under your belt and then coming in and being the leader on day one, versus Minnesota. It really took some time to grow into your role. So talk a little bit about, the receptivity in the, in the locker room for a guy like yourself who has had experience, has shown, hey, I am a good quarterback coming in.
It was new beginning. It was
Yeah.
just new beginning. They're like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Okay, we drafted a first, second, third round guy for a guy that didn't even play last year.
Yeah.
Didn't even, so was there pressure? Yeah, there was,
Yeah.
was there opportunity? Yes, there was. Was there a
Yeah.
challenge? Yes, there was, and I needed a new start at that time. And, and it starts by, I had to get in the media guide and learn the names of the players on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they? And they had to learn who I was.
Yeah.
But making these relationships and making friends and learning, how competitive we were going to be, having to learn a new system. It's hard. It's really hard to learn a new system, especially when you've been in one place for 7 years. And so I had to go from knowing everything about that playbook to like, how do you call a play in the huddle? And so, but that was the greatness of it. And we were, I had to go back and to my roots of learning the playbook of the challenges of how to call a play in the huddle, to leading a team, to being the guy that was the leader of that franchise. And it was really, honestly, it was a great moment for my wife, Nikki, and I to be in Washington, and loved it, to be honest with you.
You bet. So as time in Washington goes well, inevitably there's another trade and we get sent to Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay at this time is a team that has pretty darn good defense, but they need some help. So talk a little bit about that transition to Tampa Bay for you.
Yeah, when I went to Washington from Minnesota, that was a trade. But then when I went to Tampa from Washington, I was a free agent.
Free agent. Got it.
Yeah, so that was the awesome part of it. And I had to choose, I was coming off of like, where do I want to go? Where do I think I could be successful? And so I chose Tampa for 2 reasons. And one, I thought was the most secure contract that I could have that was offered to me. And then at that time, it was Baltimore and Kansas City with the other 2 teams. And the other was to go to Tampa to be the first quarterback that had won the Super Bowl for a franchise that had never won it. And to be honest with you, there was a little bit of ego that was driven there, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Tampa, I'd been with Tony Dungy for 3 years in Minnesota. There was a relationship there. I played against Tampa Bay in Washington and Minnesota multiple times. Great respect for a lot of those players, and played with some of those guys that were Florida State guys. There's Warwick Dunn and Dexter Jackson and Derek Brooks, the guys I knew. But then I also I'd played against Warren Saps and John Lynch and all those guys, Mike Allstott. So it was just, I felt like it was the right place for me in my career. And so I went there. It was tough. The first year we went 9-7. I felt like, honestly, we kind of overachieved, to be honest with you, because I didn't think we were talented enough as a whole to take it to the next level. We got beat the first round of the playoffs, but then the next year they brought in John Gruden, and then he made a bunch of moves in free agency. I think we brought in 15 players or so at that time. Eventually it was Joe Jervicius and Keenan McCardell and Ricky Dudley and Ken Dilger and Robin Oben and Kerry Jenkins and Michael Pittman. And it was a great nucleus of players, but we kind of added to the team.
Yeah.
And so that year John came in and day one, he said, we're going to win the Super Bowl. We're not going to talk about it, but we're going to do it. And so there was a lot to learn in his system.
Yeah.
And, but he challenged us. He challenged the defense. He challenged the offense. He brought in some great players, and we were just kind of the right fit, the right time for each other. And we're all in that moment together. How great can we become?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning of it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about having a leader, or sometimes yourself being the leader, and believing in the mission before maybe even everyone else does. I think there's a lot of power in that, whether it's someone in your life that believes in you before you do, or if it's a coach that says, hey, day one, hey, we're winning the Super Bowl. Now, there's a difference there, right? Every coach probably says that, but there's only certain coaches that you feel it, right? You believe it when they say it. So talk a little bit about that.
Yep. You hit the nail on the head. And so the very first conversation I had with Gruden, it was just me and him he was in a dark office. I mean, he just always watching film. It was a 12 by 12 box, his office, just full of playbooks, all that kind of stuff. But so I'm looking across from him across the table, and he didn't draft me. He didn't bring me in a free agency. He had to learn who I was. He'd read up on me on Wikipedia also. I mean, I had to figure out who he was too. So, but he came in there with he said, Brad, we're gonna win a Super Bowl this year. You got to believe in me. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna believe in you. Yeah. And we're gonna do this thing together. And sometimes he may be fibbing, he may be lying, or not just him, but just any kind. You want that belief, but I never really had that talk. We're going to win it now. So going back through my whole career in high school, I'd never won the last game of the season. I never won a state championship. I never won the national championship at college at Florida State. Even though we were close, we didn't get it done.
Yeah, yeah.
And so sometimes I feel like those moments where maybe it's I put so much pressure or so much thought, like someone's always better than me. That moment's too big. And so that year went on. We didn't really talk about the Super Bowl, honestly. We talked about declaring war on our defense, and he said, Brad, how are we going to beat Simeon Rice and John Lynch and Derrick Brooks, and how are they going to stop blast off the Joker right X short 22X drive halfback burst, and how are they going to stop triple right F right 358 Nebraska X seam? Like, so what I'm saying is we got caught up into the process, what we talked about earlier, let's be great today in practice. Let's declare war on our defense in practice, in training camp. And it was a great team. Obviously we had some Hall of Famers on that team with John Lynch and Derrick Brooks and Warren Sapp and hopefully some other guys make it. We had some great offensive players too.
Yeah.
And we grew in the offense of how to call the play in the huddle, of how to win games. And we won some tough games early, but we finished 3-1 every 4 games. And we finished the season 12-4. And, that process, I'm just trying to call a play on Wednesday and Thursday and compete in practice, not alone trying to win this great thing that's out there in front of us. We got caught up into the moment. And so basically we get to the playoffs, we got hot, and we won it. And John was a guy, he did believe in me. He did give me that opportunity we are going to win the last game of the season. We are going to be the Super Bowl champions, but we're going to do it through hard work and with each other. And I remember the night before the Super Bowl, he said, Brad, you're going to have to make some plays with your feet. You've been telling me ever since that first meeting, you're going to make plays with your feet.
Yeah.
But I'm going to need you to make one play with your feet. And I'm like, yes, sir. I've been nodding my head. I'm going to make those plays for 10 months. But then in the Super Bowl, everybody talks about the John Elway moment, where he ran, he got helicoptered and that whole thing. But, so there's a play in the third quarter, and it's called bunch right F short 72 crisscross Y swing. And so basically it's 3rd and 9. I drop back. We're on our 20-yard line, and no one's open. And I run, I scramble, and I get 10 yards. And no one remembers that game. No one remembers that. But that getting that first down propelled us into having an 89-yard drive for a touchdown, to taking a commanding lead at that time of the game. It was a special moment at that time of the game to take a big lead. Yeah. And so when I go back to all those days with the guy we talked about it from Chile, he says you're competing to be a triathlete, not a quarterback.
Yeah.
And those days in the sand of Brad, you are fast. And, people don't think you're fast, but you're fast enough.
Yeah.
And so here I am, that moment, all those days with Alex training in the sand, to that guy with John Gruden saying, are you gonna make a play with your feet? When is your moment? You don't know when your moment is. And that moment happened back in college with somebody believing in me, doing all that hard work. That coach here, John Gruden, give me that chance here now. That was the moment. And so I have a picture on my wall. Nobody remembers it but me. That's my favorite part of my whole career, because all the hard work, the sacrifice of all the jumping ropes and stuff, nobody remembers a 10-yard run. I do, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was my moment. And so we go ahead and win the Super Bowl. And so then you have those things you can look back and say, how did I survive? How did I survive of being recruited?
Yeah.
What sport am I going to play? To Brad, you should do this. Being that seventh quarterback and warming up on the 5-yard line, to being the 9th round draft pick, to like, am I going to make it or am I not? To go into some world league and living in some dump. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then throwing the 4 interceptions. And I'm talking about this 10-yard run, but those are the hard living moments of like, driving home at night, like, golly, like, it's dark. It's really, really dark in my house when you're not the starter, when you're living in ice baths, when you're like, people aren't cheering your name. You know what I mean? Those are tough moments. And so to have that 10-yard run is a special time for me. That's what I remember about the Super Bowl. And then after the confetti fell, and I was holding my son Max, who was 2 years. Yeah, we have 2 boys. Max is 2 years old at the time. My wife Nikki's 7.5 months pregnant, and 16 years before that happened in 1987. There was a guy named the great Phil Simms at the New York Giants, and they win the Super Bowl when they beat John Elway, and he got the confetti's falling on his face, and he's the first one to say, "I'm going to Disney World." So here I am in 2003. I'm holding my kids. I'm celebrating with confetti on my face. Holding my kids saying, "I'm going to Disney also." So it's a very surreal moment. It was all real. It was hard to get there. There were more valleys than peaks. And but those are the moments that you strive for,
Absolutely. Well, I think as you were talking, one, phrase that comes to mind is, they used to talk about some of the old wars, and they'd say, there's a bunch of battles in the way to winning a war, right? And to your point, you're not going to win every battle, but if you win enough, you can get momentum, and then you can ultimately win that war. And so, that's what you were able to do, battling through all those different moments in time.
Yep, no doubt.
So as you transition from the Bucs, then we get the opportunity to go back to the Vikings, and then we end up ending our career in Dallas with, really playing kind of a mentor role to Tony Romo. But something that was interesting to me is a stat that you hold: completing over 60% of your passes in your first 12 seasons has never been done before. And so, talk just about being consistent, because that's how you have a career like you had, right? Where you have longevity. There's a lot of people that can come in and play really great for a year or 2 years, but it's a different beast to do it consistently year after year after year. So just talk about, the consistency on your behalf and, how that led to your ultimate success.
Yeah, that 60% mark at that time was a big deal. The rules are changed now. So now the guys are throwing 70%, and it's just different. But at that time, to throw over 60%, it was a bigger deal in the NFL.
Yeah.
And to have done that for 11, 12 years or whatever it was pretty, it was a unique stat.
Yeah.
And so I took a lot of pride in it, to be honest with you. And so in that 60%, it's not just, it's not just throwing a ball. It's decision-making, managing a game. And people say game manager is real. I mean, pitchers, you can throw it 112 miles an hour, but can you get across the plate? You got to get ahead in the count.
Yep.
You can't be hitting second serves in tennis and win. You got to get that first serve in. In football, you got to be good on first down, second down. Sometimes you need to punt the ball. Sometimes you got to play the game. Yeah. And so that was, I think, the reasons why I love the game was, obviously calling and playing a huddle, but then just leading my guys. So like, calling and playing a huddle. Hey, line, I need a little extra time on this play. It's going to be a little bit deeper route. And, hey, get your hands down on short throws and talk to my receivers. I need you at 12 yards on this route, not 11. I need you when I throw that comeback, I need you to come back down the hill. Like you just can't be, you know, you want to be, you want to have ownership of what you're
Yeah.
doing, you know?
Yeah.
And so I want to take command of my team to play that long. You can't be just a guy. I saw guys throw touchdown passes sometimes in preseason. The fans going crazy. I'm like, his eyes were in the wrong direction. He threw a touchdown pass to his left, but he found some guy on the right. Like he's not going to last. You're not going to
Yeah.
last if you're not doing, staying through your progressions, through your reads, doing it time and time and being consistent over time.
Yeah.
That's the biggest deal, and not get caught up in the flash moments. You
Yeah.
need flash moments, but you got to be consistent over time. And so for me, I love leading my team in the huddle. I love leading my team after wins and losses, and or after touchdowns and interceptions. How do you handle those moments? And it goes back to my friend Alex Serrano. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you controlling your breathing, controlling your attitude. What's next? The play you had before, the touchdown or interception, that's over. What's the next play? Then what's the next play? Then what's the next play? So you can't fast forward. You can only live in the moment. And that's kind of where I try to be my career, but be consistent with that over time.
Absolutely. So as you're retiring from the NFL, there's something to be said about finding joy and being able to reflect on a nice long career. But there's also that piece of you that's like the thing that I've known and worked so hard for my whole life, playing it is coming to an end. And so talk a little bit about just the emotional side of working through, ending a career and, what that was like for you as you transition into not being a player in the NFL anymore.
It's tough. I mean, This is what you do. You wake up every day. I'm lifting weights. I'm watching playbooks. I'm going to the locker room. I'm going to practice. I'm going to a game. Like when your career's over, there's no more free food. There's no more. You don't get to go to the doctor without making an appointment. There's no more police escorts going to games. Like now I'm the guy looking for tickets through StubHub and buying popcorn in the stands, and like you become normal. You know what I mean? Right. You think you're Superman and invincible, and then all of a sudden you're the I'm paying for parking out here. You know what I mean? So those were real moments, Yeah. And so for my career to end I wish I could have played those still to this day, but my body was done. My arm was done. My knees were done. Like I couldn't play anymore. So it kind of helped me physically move on.
Yeah.
No, physically helped me emotionally that physically I cannot play anymore. So I really got into coaching a lot of kids. Yeah. Coaching middle school, youth football, high school football. Work with a lot of quarterbacks a little bit on the side. One of the cool moments I had was like back in the 80s. I know we're going way back in time, but there was a basketball camp. And at the camp is up in Grayson, Kentucky, called Bob Zefflotta Basketball Camp. And so some kids came over from France. And so one day they let them go to Lexington to the mall. And so when they went to the mall, they bought a lot of them bought three things. They bought Levi blue jeans. Okay, they didn't have blue jeans. The next thing they bought these things called Nikes, which are Nike shoes. Yeah. They were just brand new. And the third thing they bought was football. And so there were two guys from France that were throwing a football, and they were throwing it like a shot put. Ooh, they were throwing like 12 feet, like 10 yards. Like it was like a shot put. Like I was like, what are y'all doing? And so I took the ball and I said, let me show you what this thing does. And I threw it about 40 yards, and they're like, whoa, do it again, whoa, do it again. And so it's cool because they got to see what that ball could do. You're talking about 2-second moments, like they didn't, it's like teaching somebody how to throw a frisbee or a golf ball. Like this is what these things can do if you actually do it the right way. Right. And so for me, like when I coach kids, like, if it's a kid that's not very good, he's sixth grade, like my goal is to help him become better at throwing a spiral, or maybe he can become the starter in middle school football, or maybe he can become, instead of the backup, he can maybe become the starter in high school. Maybe the starter can, maybe he's good enough to get a scholarship, and so, and so to help these kids become a little bit better than what they really are, and to kind of give them belief, which somebody gave me belief. Yep. And kind of pass it on and those things and help them have their little moments also.
Absolutely. Now, last, to wrap it up, you are getting the opportunity, one, to watch kids play sports now, but also over the last little while, you've gotten into this trick shot game, which, it's kind of combining the things that you always were passionate about, but in a little bit less of a competitive with a defense and more just, hey, what the heck is possible? Talk a
Right.
little bit about how all that came to be.
Yeah. During the pandemic,
Yeah.
we're all sitting at the home, sitting in our house. We have
Yeah.
my wife Nikki, our two boys Max and Jake. They get on this thing called TikTok. I'm like, what are
Yeah.
y'all doing? They're made doing all these dances, and I couldn't do the dance. I'm not coordinated enough to do all that. So I was the camera guy.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was kind of dumb. But then I started watching TikTok, and I was like, man, there's some pretty talented people out there making some shots and trick shots. I'm like, how do I'm not good technology with learning how to do, with all the stuff on the phones nowadays. But then I started making videos of my career, of workout videos, and I started doing some trick shots.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm gonna do something different. I'm pretty good at throwing a football. I'm pretty good at shooting a basketball. And then I started making these trick shots. When I do it, my goal is to make multiple shots in a row instead of just one lucky trick shot behind some fence. My goal is to make 3, 4, maybe 5 shots in a row.
Yeah.
And these crazy shots and maybe spin off my finger, or off my head, or over a backboard, and then I don't know, some crazy. Everybody can see it when they see it on TikTok and stuff. But to make these shots, and then I usually throw a football into the basketball at the end. So if that last shot doesn't go in, then I don't make the video. So it actually becomes a workout. It becomes competitive. It becomes like a challenge. And then when you see me celebrate, it becomes a fun thing. So I've been making all these crazy trick shots on TikTok, and it's been all over social media. But I've had fun doing it, and then people kind of get a little laughter with it too.
Absolutely. And I can attest, guys, he is not cutting and chopping these videos up. It is in sync. It's just one after the other. So we'll definitely include your handle on there so people can go watch it. But Brad, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing your story and the pivotal moments that have led you to where you're at today. What an amazing, just testament of character and grit, just continue to fight through, different adversities along the way to get to that ultimate goal. And so thanks so much for sharing this, and can't wait to continue to follow your journey. And, hopefully we get to do this again soon and kind of talk about all the new things that have happened since then.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate you reaching out, doing the research, and it was great doing an interview with you. I appreciate y'all, all the hard work you put into it. Thank you.